Alright, I've got a bit of time, so I'm going to address a comment I got on my Schizoid video, the original Schizoid video, from Scott, who says, would love to hear your thoughts on folk self-diagnosing. Because that's come up a few times, and I figure, why not? I could make this a really short video and just tell you it depends, and nuance is important, and there's not enough nuance on the internet these days, unfortunately. And not just when it comes to things like mental health, self-diagnosis, I mean like just in general. You know, what sells is the extremes, right? So I could take some really extreme position and be like, no, you should never self-diagnose, or yes, all self-diagnosis is totally valid. But both of those are not true. I think it's complicated. So, you know, self-diagnosis, okay. I have, like, medically verified diagnosis of, like, depression, I guess you would say major depressive disorder, and schizoid personality disorder, and it's also on my government records, possible dissociative identity disorder, which I think is a bit of a mistake. And so maybe that comes to our first issue, is that sometimes the experts, like, you got to remember, they're only human, and misdiagnosis does happen, and certain professionals are looking for what they want to see, and DID in particular is pretty controversial, and the majority of diagnoses are made by people who specifically work in that field, and often they have a very specific interest in it, and you know, they kind of do get stuck in that world. Like, you know, if you watch a lot of DID content, they have their whole terminology and, like, they're almost religious might be the wrong word, but they have, like, a really strong adherence to their theories of how it works, which aren't necessarily completely supported by the mainstream science. But on the other hand, you know, for some psychological things, it's really hard to get really objective data on a lot of things. Like schizoid. A lot of schizoids don't come forward for treatment unless there's some other issue, like depression, which is a thing that I've struggled with for way too long. But yeah, if schizoids don't come forward for treatment, often they're not going to be detected. They just fly under the radar because schizoid is one of those very non-dramatic disorders. So, you know, if people are keeping to themselves, not causing trouble, why are you going to bother them? Even if they might have really difficult lives and actually be struggling themselves, they don't cause trouble, so no one knows. And I think part of the disorder is just trying to do stuff yourself because the world is stupid. Why trust other people to do it? I mean, it's complicated because it also depends on what different people with schizoid are like. You know, just because we have the same diagnosis doesn't mean we're all the same, or experience that disorder all the same. Where was I going with that? But yeah, no, okay, so if schizoids don't come forward for treatment, it means they're also not going to come forward to be studied. So how do you get objective science on that? And that's something, not with my current psychologist, but the one before. She really recognized that I have a very science focus and, you know, did warn me when I went to see the DID specialist that, you know, she would probably push EMDR on me, which doesn't have the best evidence, and she warned me that I might have a problem with that, which of course I did. But the way she tried to get me to have an open mind about it is saying, look, yes, you want the scientific data, you want it to be, you know, solid research and not bullshit fluff. But fact is, some of these things just aren't studied enough. There isn't the data, so you have to use like the closest what we've got. So, you know, with diagnosis, you can't just go 100% on the science, unfortunately, because, you know, especially for, like, so DID does get more notice because it is more dramatic, but it's also controversial, so the psychology community is a bit like, you know, maybe we'll study it, maybe we'll chuck it in the garbage. They're much more interested in disorders like borderline personality disorder because that is dramatic and affects everyone around them because they're chaotic people and they get into a lot of trouble themselves because they engage in risky behaviors when things are flaring up. So that gets studied to the point that, like, I was going to make a video about this, but, so there's 2 diagnostic manuals. There's the DSM, which is the American one, and then there's the ICD, which I think is run by the WHO. The ICD, I get the feeling, is trying to be a bit more politically correct. And I think sometimes they miss the mark. Because, like, their idea of, with taking the DID thing, their idea of DID is actually different to the DSM idea of DID, because you have the different levels. There's, like, full-blown DID, and then there's OSDD, or partial DID, which is, like, the next level down, where it's not that full-blown thing. The DSM side of it is, like, okay, if you don't experience memory blackouts, you're not in that extreme level. And so by DSM, there's no way I would qualify as DID or even get close, because I don't have memory blackouts. But on the ICD side, they kind of use more structural dissociation. I mean, I could be wrong, but, like, when I've looked at it, it strikes me as they're using the theory of structural dissociation, which is, like, deep in the DID community. Like, that is a thing that they believe in. But it doesn't take into account other dissociative conditions, and it also includes other conditions that are not dissociative at all. So it's, I find, iffy. But the structural dissociation thing is, if you have different parts at all that are distinct enough, then yes, you qualify as full-blown DID. So, I mean, maybe you could weasel me into full-blown DID by the ICD version of things. So there's an issue with diagnosis, because it depends on what manual they're using. And then you're going to confuse people because it's inconsistent. And so if I said, oh, I've got DID, and if people only know the DSM version, they're going to think I have blackouts and become a different person, like in a really obvious, over-the-top, Dissociative, or who are the other famous ones? I don't know, I think Dissociative's the biggest one, and she's like a real show pony about it. They would think that kind of shit. But that might not be how someone has classified me in that, for example. And so, there's a bit of bullshit going on there. But with bringing it back to schizoid, the ICD, the most recent version of ICD-11, has erased schizoid, which is fucked up. Instead, all personality disorders have just been lumped in as personality disorder. So you give someone a label of personality disorder, what does that even mean? Like, there's sub-labels, okay, but you're just overcomplicating it. Like, if I say I've got schizoid personality disorder, you can go in and be like, okay, DSM, what does that say? Oh, okay, low social needs and all this kind of stuff, cool. But if I just come and say, hey, I have personality disorder, what does that mean? It could mean anything. Now, because borderline personality disorder is so exciting to psychologists and whatever, they have a specific tag that you can put on standard personality disorder, I think with borderline features, or like they have a specific tag, because they're the only personality disorder that I guess is acceptable in some way to the psychology community or the international psychology community or something, or it's like the only one that's big enough or exciting enough for them to give a shit. Meanwhile, if you're schizoid, you're just lumped in with these weird specifiers that are just too much of a pain to, I don't even know. I think it's a poor decision by the ICD people, WHO, whatever, because, yeah, if I just turn up to a psychology clinic and I say, hey, I've got personality disorder and I'm looking for treatment, that could be anything from the schizoid end through pretty much to borderline, and borderline is basically the opposite of schizoid. Because they have too many emotions, and schizoids don't have enough emotions, and they get into too much trouble, and we don't get into any trouble and just suffer in silence a lot of the time. Like, there's this huge range of what personality disorders can be, and I think the ICD-11 has kind of fucked it up, because you just do that, and then you've got to go, okay, well, what are your sub-labels? So, expertise, there's issues there. Psychology as a field, very difficult to study. A lot of studies are based on, like, surveys, which when I went to my first university and I was studying psychology and I had to go into a certain number of studies, I'm sure I've told you this one, where there was also a screening thing because certain studies needed particular types of people. So there was a screening questionnaire and we submitted them, and then I got selected for one where I'm sure they were looking at like social anxiety or something like that. And when I went in, what we had to do is sit down and watch videos of people giving a speech. Like, you know, the exercise was, hey, you've got to give a 2-minute speech. Doesn't matter what it is, but it's got to be a 2-minute speech and it's going to be filmed. And then before I went in, they're like, okay, here's some that other people have done. And they were super shy people. Okay, then I'm like, what am I going to talk about? Shit, I think this is before I even did YouTube, so I hadn't had the practice. But I thought I'll talk about Pokemon. I'll go on a rant about the different generations and how I think the first and second generation of the Pokemon games and the characters were good, but the third generation started to go downhill, and I think that correlates with the original creator not being part of the thing anymore, and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I get up in front of the camera, and I just start going on a rant. And, you know, you guys know what I'm like on YouTube these days. Well, that was the precursor. I was always headed in this direction. And I haven't seen that video of me, but I don't think I came across as shy at all. I was just like, great, cool, talking to a camera, I'll just go on a rant. And she didn't stop me. After a while, I'm like, I've been talking for a long time. And so I'm like, should I stop? Do you want me to keep going? How much time has passed? And she's just like, yeah, you can stop. I don't know. I never found out what that study was about because I dropped out before they finished the study. And, you know, I think they were supposed to give us a debrief, but by then I was gone, so I never heard about it. Why was I talking about that screening thing? Oh, it's just like, you know, when you get someone like me, I assume for that study, I would be considered an outlier. So I don't know if they used my part in that study or if they just discarded me because I was too different to what they were expecting. Like, they were probably looking for social anxiety because I would have ticked out I don't like hanging out with people, blah, 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 blah. And then I come out and I'm like, you know, when I'm on camera, a lot of the time I seem pretty confident, but if you met me in real life, depending on how I'm doing that day, I can be quite closed in, and it's kind of awkward to meet people from the internet sometimes. You know, it depends, but I think I'm getting better at it, but I used to like really not want to meet anyone who had seen me online. Anyway, no, so some of those studies are just run by students, and a lot of the studies are done on other students. Of course, the better studies are run on larger populations, but there is a bit of guesswork in there. Psychology is different to, like, measuring physics, you know, because physics you can take into account all the variables and get pretty decent answers. Psychology, we don't really know how the brain works. So there's issues there in terms of studying it and, you know, trying to find participants for these studies and trying to account for all the weirdness out there. And they didn't know I had schizoid at the time. I didn't even have a diagnosis of depression at that point. I only got diagnosed after I dropped out because, you know, like, I managed to make it through high school, but then that first semester of uni, by the end of it, like, I got up to exams, and I think that's when I realized, like, this is not what I should be doing with my life. Like, I just had this deep sense of, this is fucked. Like, I couldn't push through anymore. So then I got the diagnosis of depression. But at the time, so they did the screening survey. I don't know if there were questions about, have you been diagnosed with anything? Mental health awareness wasn't as big back then. But yeah, so there's a lot of stuff they didn't know about me. If that went in the study, did that mess with their results? I don't know. What I'm trying to say is, like, psychology in particular is not an exact science, so there's that as an issue. So what have I covered? Like, the biases of people diagnosing you, gaps in knowledge, gaps in research, the unreliability of research. Like, that's not to discard everything about psychology, because, you know, you use statistics, and statistics done well can tell you quite a lot, especially for a field this difficult. Like, you need the statistics, and that's why I didn't respect one of my psychologists that I saw, because she's like, I don't understand statistics, why it's in psychology. And I'm like, you fuckhead, you've just outed yourself as an idiot. But, you know, statistics used badly can be manipulative. And so if you ever hear, like, news reports and they get all excited about some statistic, chances are it's bullshit, because news people are news people. They don't know maths. That's why they became journalists and not mathematicians or scientists, for fuck's sake. Anyway, yeah. So, the field of psychology, that's difficult. And so when you're doing self-diagnosis, or when someone is just diagnosing you in general, yes, they're experts, but there's a lot of human error, and there's like errors in gaps in the knowledge. It's not like mathematics where there is a correct answer. It can be really difficult, and that's why it probably took so long to get me diagnosed, and they still have a question mark about this dissociation shit. But I'm going back to that psychologist. I'm ditching my current psychologist and going back to the one before, because I had a call with her yesterday. I know I'm getting off topic. But yeah, I was definitely going to drop out of treatment with the current psychologist because she wants to charge $280. Once I run out of government-funded sessions, that's a lot of money, and I don't feel like I'm getting anything out of it. I feel like I just go and I talk about stuff that I've thought myself, and I don't really get anything from her. Whereas I had a really good call with my previous psychologist yesterday. It was 40 minutes long, for free. With it, like, it's almost the length of a proper psychology session, for free. And she's like asking me like where I'm at with my treatment. She actually remembers a lot of stuff about me, and my issues. And, you know, talking about my goals and, you know, what's going on with psychology, what's going on with my life. 40-minute chat just because she wanted to make sure that she's the right person to treat me. And then her fee was already low, like $230. That's her standard rate, so $50 cheaper than the current people. But she actually reduced it to $200 for me, which means I can go every fortnight and just continue my treatment, because I clearly am someone who is not just going to get better in short-term treatment. Like, I need long-term fucking... Anyway. Why was I talking about the current... the psychologist I'm changing to? I don't know. I guess there's, like, you know, different personalities and, like, how much the treating professional can understand you at all. And then I just mentioned cost. You want to go and get self-diagnosed. You want to go and get properly diagnosed. What if you don't have the money? I understand that. There's a lot of people out there who can't afford it. I mooch off my parents. I live in my parents' house. I have relatively low expenses, like, because I wouldn't survive otherwise. Like, it's difficult living here at times, but financially, it's the best thing that I can do is to stay here, and I'm lucky that they at least support me that much, even if they don't understand me and my problems, and how they may have contributed to it. But, you know, like, I have a place to live. I can afford to go and get that treatment, even when the government drops me on my ass, despite, you know, Bondi happening, you know, the Bondi guy running around with a knife. You're all the fuss about mental health treatment, and they did nothing for someone like me with complex needs, but not in the way where I need to be in hospital and I can't take medication and all that. Like, what am I supposed to do, Albo? Fucking yeah, anyway. But so I can afford to go and get myself diagnosed and get ongoing treatment, and I'm doing my best to stick to it, and I think this psychologist will help me. But if you're not in my situation, maybe self-diagnosis is your only option. And again, also, if the treating professionals don't understand you, they may misdiagnose you. And if you have good self-awareness and you can be honest with yourself, maybe your self-diagnosis is accurate. You know best what's going on in your head. The caveat to that is, when you have mental illness, you don't always really know how badly you're doing. Like, it's taken me a long time to realize, actually, I'm probably doing worse than I think. And to just think, shit, I'm going to need probably, like, lifelong ongoing treatment. I don't know. But yeah. So, but, you know, then again, there are people out there who will just slap labels on themselves, like these kids on TikTok who give themselves Tourette's. There's social contagions and so on. And so I think if you're younger, self-diagnosing is, you know, be careful. Whereas if you're older and you've matured some and you've learned to be honest with yourself and not just be super defensive when someone questions your diagnosis, then maybe you'll be more accurate. But it's tricky. There's nuance there, and people are different. And even if you are older and you have all that experience, if you're really set on an idea, you may not actually know what your problem is. And there are adults out there who clearly have no self-awareness, but they think they do. Have you ever seen those articles where it's like, studies show that such and such group are actually really intelligent? So like, you know, maybe it'll say, I don't know, like drummers are actually really intelligent if you can play drums, whatever. But like, those are pop articles, and of course everyone reading it who's a drummer will be like, yes, I'm so smart, just because they read that article. And it's like, no, fuckhead. Just because you play drums doesn't mean you specifically are smart. Maybe they're talking about like a certain subgroup. I hate those kinds of articles, and it's sort of just confirmation bias. It confirms to the person who thinks they're smart. And like, I'm sure you guys are familiar with Dunning-Kruger, where dumb people think they're smart and smart people think they're dumb. You know, in a nutshell, I know that's a very simplified view of it, but, you know, self-perception. I can't, like, you know, someone might really know and really understand themselves and be able to self-diagnose. But then there's a lot of kids out there, kids in particular, but also some adults, but kids who just want to fit in. And so such and such disorder is in vogue, so they decide they have it. You know, there's been, especially teenagers go through all these trends. Like, that's historic. Whether they've gone through their emo phases or whatever. I guess emo was when I was younger. I was a bit oblivious to the whole thing, so I kind of missed out on that, but apparently that's the one that was in vogue when I was younger. And, you know, there's even been the social contagions, like, historically, where people had that dancing disease where everyone just, like, could not stop dancing, and some people dropped dead because they were dancing too much. And it was just one of those weird social contagions, which is interesting to think about psychologically as well, like that mass hysteria type stuff. Anyway, so do you have enough self-awareness to self-diagnose you? Can you be honest with yourself? If you see something, like, maybe are you too invested in the diagnosis you want to give yourself? If you can admit to yourself that you can't be objective, then maybe you should go and get it confirmed by a medical professional. But the other thing is, why are you wanting a medical diagnosis? Like, do you need it? Is self-diagnosis enough to help you understand yourself for now? Because, like, what's the reason to self-diagnose? Okay, you're trying to understand yourself, you're trying to understand your challenges, and if you can understand that, maybe you can work out what to do about it. Cool. Why would you get a medically verified diagnosis? Well, in my case, because the government, Centrelink in particular, were harassing me a lot, and, you know, it took a long time, but getting all the paperwork together, you know, I had the backing of my GP, 2 psychologists and a psychiatrist, and Centrelink haven't bothered me, cross fingers, they haven't bothered me for a long time. I know, what other superstitious bullshit, like, I know it's not really a thing, but someone find some wood and touch it for me. You know, I needed to get a proper diagnosis for medical reasons, to, like, get the treatment that I need. Also to help the people treating me understand what my problems are, instead of continuing to give me just standard depression treatment that clearly wasn't working. They needed to know that I have schizoid personality disorder, because schizoids don't seem to experience depression the same way that the general population do. And yeah, for Centrelink, for government support, because they require a shitload of evidence to leave you the hell alone. Otherwise, they keep trying to make you do useless stuff that just stresses you out and actually makes your mental health worse. So that's why I needed to go and get proper diagnoses, proper treatment, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, if you're someone who needs that, then yes, it's worth going to get a proper verified diagnosis. If you don't need that, maybe you can get by with self-diagnosis. If you say, though, that you have a diagnosis, but it's not official, but you don't disclose that it's not official, that's where I have a problem. Like, I'm fine with people saying, hey, I'm a self-diagnosed whatever, because then I can be like, okay, you're pretty sure you have this, but there's an asterisk. Whereas, you know, I think some people are a bit dishonest, and they self-diagnose and then go and tell other people they have such and such disorder. And I think those people are less likely to have the self-awareness to be self-diagnosing. You know, it's hard to go through all the nuances though. Because, you know, I mean, sometimes people just use things as a shorthand. Like, you know, mum will tell people that Mikey has autism, which he does not, but he has some similarities. So it's easier to explain his behavior in that one word than to be like, yeah, he has a general unspecified intellectual impairment, and he's, you know, he gets fixated on these things and he understands these things and whatever. Like, that's too hard for people to understand in shorthand, like, you know, in a short period of time. Whereas if you just say, oh, he's got autism, and take the lazy way, people get a general idea. It still annoys me, but people get a general idea. And so maybe it's just a passing conversation and not that important. Okay, fine, say whatever. Just be careful, because sometimes it can lead to, you know, things not being great. Also, this isn't a problem in Australia, as far as I'm aware, but like, I mean, maybe for life insurance, but I'm not going to get life insurance. In America, maybe, I know you've got pre-existing condition kinds of things, and maybe getting a diagnosis might affect your insurance, or I don't know. You've got to think about your circumstances. Is it worth getting diagnosed? And, you know, balancing, why do you want to get diagnosed? Is it just to help you understand yourself? Is it because you want to fit into a group and you're doing it dishonestly? Can you be honest with yourself? Yeah, complicated. And like, you know, this extends beyond, as I said, beyond schizoid, beyond DID. Autism, I think, is not technically a mental illness. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder. And a lot of people seem to go around saying, oh, I've got autism. And I think most people who think they have autism probably do, even if they're not properly diagnosed. But there is a risk, particularly with younger people, that they're doing it because autism kind of is trendy in our society today. And like, to the point that I think that's one other reason it took so long for me to get the schizoid diagnosis, because people were like, you know, it looks like autism, and they can't think of anything else because schizoid gets no publicity. So it never occurred to anyone. It's not trendy to be schizoid, so it never occurred to anyone that it could be a thing. Yeah, so stuff like that. You know, other people trying to diagnose me without taking into consideration all the different nuances. But yeah, no, like, it's kind of, in the media, they're like, they paint autism like it's some kind of superpower. Oh, look at this very specific person who achieved this amazing thing because they're so autistic. They have this huge focus on something and they were able to do something amazing. Okay, for every one of those genius, autistic, aspy kinds of people, there are actually quite a lot of autistic people who are severely, profoundly autistic, cannot speak for themselves. Like, these are the kids that I grew up with, because I have a disabled brother, and I used to go to, you know, the centers that he went to. He went to a special school. We used to go to their concerts. And so I have seen quite a lot of very severely disabled kids, and a number of them severely autistic, including ones where they would get frustrated and just bash their heads into the wall because that's how severely affected they were. You know, so the media talks about the ones that are doing amazing things, and, you know, the mild cases of autism where maybe it does help them do certain things better to help balance out the challenges they have, but they completely ignore the really severe autistics, and their families, because the families are the ones who have to look after them and, you know, speak about their needs. So it annoys me that the mildly autistic community want to say it's not a disorder because, oh, it's just being different. We just have different needs. No, fuck you. You haven't seen what severely autistic people are like. And this is the problem I have with the disability community in general, because also physically disabled people like to talk for the whole disabled community, but they have no idea what it's like for someone who has an intellectual disability and their families who have to care for them. They don't understand because they haven't been there. They just get all, oh, disability rights, and you shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. To the point that, I know I'm going on a rant beyond self-diagnosis because, of course, that's me. But, you know, there's this politically correct bullshit that came in a few years back where my brother, my intellectually impaired and disabled brother has epilepsy, cerebral palsy, and just, very simple-minded kind of thinking. He has a great life because he can't understand how shit the world is. Anyway, so, they're like, oh, you're not allowed to restrain them, you're not allowed to use force, you're not allowed to do all this. So basically, and my parents actually asked if this was the case, if he tries to run out in front of traffic and he's about to get hit, does that mean that his carers are not allowed to grab him and pull him back to safety? And the place that he was at said, yeah, that's right. And my parents had to give specific permission to be like, if he's about to get hurt, you have permission to restrain him and pull him back away from what he's, ridiculous shit like that. Because I guess physically disabled people do go through a lot, and people can take advantage of them and try and force them to do stuff because, they're physically not able to do certain things. But when it comes to intellectually disabled kids, sometimes for their safety, you have to do things that would be maybe restrictive or unacceptable to someone in a different situation, and it's just like, that shit pisses me off. Anyway, so that comes back to the lack of nuance in society in general, because they're only thinking about one issue. Oh, we shouldn't restrict people, we shouldn't restrain people, that's so mean. And they only think about one situation, and they don't consider other people's needs, more widely, diverse needs. There we go, diversity. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that are very well-meaning, but they just don't realize what the extended consequences of that are. For example, I think in my state, they're gradually trying to make different councils move to one garbage pickup every fortnight. And when you live in a household full of nappies, adult nappies, you don't want those nappies sitting in the bin for 2 weeks. Are you kidding? Maybe for a single a single person or a couple who don't have kids, they could get away with putting their trash out once a fortnight. But if you have a family, if you have disabled people, if you have elderly people wearing nappies, it's just not a policy that's well thought through. Anyway, so self-diagnosis. Okay, we've talked about the mental health, we've talked about neurodevelopmental autism. I think these days ADHD is in that similar kind of a spectrum. And, also the other thing about autism is to get properly diagnosed is even more expensive than just mental illnesses. So that's another thing. And, if you get diagnosed with autism, is that going to open up supports for you? Or are you so mild that you won't get anything extra and it's just for your curiosity? So is it worth getting that diagnosis? Or do you kind of know enough that you can just self-diagnose, but you don't need those extra supports and it's not worth the money, you don't have the money, so why do it? That's another thing. And then if I want to get a bit more controversial, should I be doing this during Pride Month? But so I know there's a lot of gender stuff, and a lot of kids are saying that they're trans. Now this one I think is the most difficult because people get very sensitive about it and very defensive about it, and there's a bit of a religious aspect. But this is to give an example of how the extremes in society fuck this up. Okay, so you've got your right-wing conservatives saying all these people who think they're trans, it's all bullshit. They will say that. And, even there was one where Ben Shapiro and what's that chick, Blair White, they got together to talk about it. And Blair White, she actually got Ben Shapiro to admit that if we're at a restaurant and you need to talk to a waiter or something and refer to her, would you, because Blair is biologically male and Ben Shapiro is I'm only going to refer to people by their original pronouns, she said, would you say to the waiter he in reference to Blair? And he was well, obviously that would be confusing in that situation, so okay, I would refer to you as a she. I can't remember what video that was because it was a long time ago. I haven't been watching as much YouTube these days, so yeah. But that exchange, that kind of tells you where some of the extremes are, is Blair has obviously transitioned and, you know, clearly has gender dysphoria, clearly has done what she needed to do to alleviate that. And your Ben Shapiros are just being stupid when they say all trans people are bullshit or whatever. Like, Blair even admits, like, yes, she recognizes that she's biologically male, and that's a very sensible way to go about it. But, you know, your Ben Shapiros are like, meh, 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 meh. That's an extreme view that doesn't make sense to just dismiss it all, because gender dysphoria used to be called gender identity disorder, which I think is a better label to help society take it seriously. When you take away the word disorder, now they just think it's some bullshit. Oh, dysphoria. You just, you know, dysphoria is the opposite of euphoria. Euphoria, you feel really good. Dysphoria, you feel really bad. So, you know, I understand, like, what they were trying to do when they changed it to dysphoria, because they're trying to improve acceptance or whatever, but I think they removed the seriousness by changing it from disorder to dysphoria. So, like, it's a real condition and people really suffer, and for some of them the only option, like, they will have tried everything and the only option is to transition. So your Ben Shapiros of the world are just being stupid when they dismiss all of them. They're nitpicking. Are you familiar with the concept of nitpicking? It's where, you know, you take a group, you find the craziest people in there, and you act as if everyone in that community is that level of crazy, which is bullshit. It's a logical fallacy, or whatever the fuck you want to call it. It's bullshit. And so your Ben Shapiros on their channels, you know, they'll go and find, and actually I have watched some of his reacting to TikTok videos, because it's kind of funny to just watch him in pain being subjected to some of these horrible videos. But his producers will pick the craziest examples of people on the internet, so then he goes away thinking that all people claiming to be trans are that crazy. And so that is one extreme. The other extreme, though, is the people who are like, everything you think about yourself is valid. And this isn't just for the trans stuff, this is also the DID people who start inventing new personalities because it's cool or whatever. Oh, man. And then they, like, catch their switch on camera, and it's just obvious acting bullshit because it gets views and it gets the money. But, you know, those are the people doing it for profit. People also do it because they want to be included. But yeah, no, there's like the side of the trans thing, which is like, you don't need gender dysphoria to transition, and you don't need to take hormones, and you don't need to put any effort into transition. You can just slap a label on yourself and that's enough. And it's sort of like devaluing and dismissing what people with gender dysphoria go through, you know, so now anyone can claim that label and it becomes completely meaningless. And then they get very angry if you, and, you know, when people challenge them on it, like, or even just make an innocent mistake. This is something that happened to me in the asexual community, which was meant to be about asexuality, but it got invaded by the trans thing, so maybe I'm a little bit bitter, but I don't do well with groups anyway. But, you know, I made a comment in support of a they-them thing, but I wasn't supportive in the right way, and so then they all attacked me as if I was on the other side, just because I didn't have the perfect opinion. And it was, I guess, a challenge to how they thought about themselves. I don't even know what their problem was, because it was so illogical. But, you know, that side of, like, everything goes doesn't make sense at all, because if everything goes, what is the point of transition, calling yourself trans, calling yourself these gender things, if you don't have the dysphoria? What is your problem? Is it just your self-expression? Because that's fine, dress however you want, that's cool. I had the colored hair, I didn't have to change my gender or anything. I just wanted to look how I wanted to look, and I keep changing my mind on that. But yeah, I just think, like, there's no nuance. There's, like, on the internet, and I think most people realize that those views are extreme bullshit. Like, your Ben Shapiro saying all trans is bullshit. That's obviously insane. And then on the other side, you've got the people saying everything you think about yourself is true, and that's insane too. Those are the two extremes that you get online. And so, you know, the lack of nuance in all these discussions is really annoying, and the fact that so much of society and that issue in particular goes on about it, and like, I think that makes it really difficult for people who think they might have a gender problem. It makes it harder for them to know what to do, because on the one side, like, especially if they're sensible about it, on the one side you have those Ben Shapiros telling you that what you think is bullshit and you're just, you might just be gay, or maybe you're just confused, or maybe you're just a child and you just need to grow up. But on the other side, you've got the people saying that whatever you think is valid, and you should transition as early as possible. You should take hormones that are going to screw you up if you, like, if you decide that you're wrong. And now we see all these detransitioners coming out. So you're getting all these different messages. And if you try and self-diagnose and you're not certain about where you're at, I think that can be difficult and dangerous. You could get yourself into some strife, because, yeah, there are some detransitioners who have made permanent changes. And then they've realized, actually, that's not where I should have been, and they screwed things up. So in that case, maybe you should see a professional. But now we know that there has also been scandals where professionals were pushing people into transition before they were sure, and before they were ready, and before there was enough evidence to say that certain treatments were safe. So, there are certain, I think when issues are in the media, that's probably when you need to be more careful. Like for schizoid, if someone thinks they're schizoid, chances are they're very, in their own world, and they're reading a lot about this stuff, and they're really thinking deeply about it. So probably people who think they're schizoid might be closer to the truth. But if someone is watching stuff in the media or popular culture, TikTok, whatever, and they think they're part of one of that, I think that's where things get a bit more difficult, because there's so many influences coming from these different sides, and people trying to tell you stuff, and they're telling you the extremes, they're not telling you the nuance. I think that's difficult. And while I'm on the topic, I think when I was younger, I had a mild form of gender dysphoria because I wanted to be a boy, and that didn't really leave me for a very long time. I don't even remember when it properly left. I decided fairly early that I wasn't going to do anything because, Blue Healers, there was a description in Blue Healers of what transition from female to male involved, particularly downstairs, and I was like, thanks. And so I was like, okay, but I was still young, and I heard about this tribe. I'm sure I've told you this before. I've heard about this tribe where genetically there's some weird quirk where a lot of the kids can seem female until about the age of 12, and then suddenly everything drops and it turns out they're actually a boy. And so I was waiting until I was like, okay, I'm almost 12, am I going to suddenly turn out to be a boy? It didn't happen. And then, it took a long time. I got more and more comfortable with androgyny. And I think probably once I started getting into goth fashion, that probably helped more, because you can do more interesting stuff with it, and the female stuff doesn't suck. Because that's one thing I didn't like about being a girl, is people were trying to force me into these flowery dresses, and just didn't feel right. I think also for me personally, there's a trauma element, because, my youngest brother, disabled, gets all the attention. Second, the middle child brother, my parents are sporty people, prefer the male stuff, didn't understand my interests. I wasn't a girly girl either, so I don't really have any good, my parents didn't really understand me, and I saw the boys getting all the attention, but also the middle child. The boys get to do fun stuff, but then as a chick you try and do it and they're like, oh, it's not safe, or, you'll get hurt, or it's not ladylike, or whatever. And so I think as a child, that's what gave me some level of gender dysphoria, and it actually stuck with me quite a long time. And I'm still not that thrilled about being a chick, but I kind of recognized that I would make a terrible man. Also, I don't like body modifications in general for myself. I didn't even get my ears pierced as a kid because I don't like pain. I don't like the aftercare. That's another reason I won't get a tattoo, because I found out about the aftercare and I'm like, I cannot shower that often. So the only changes I make to my body are hair is not permanent, it grows back, cool. Dental stuff I had to do because my teeth were all fucked up. That's more of a medical issue though. So the nuance is you can have gender dysphoria, but it can be at a low level where you don't need to actually transition. You just need to find a way to be okay with your body. Where's the discussion on that? So you could have a condition like schizoid and not need treatment. You can have any kind of condition, and if you are able to function in your life, you don't need treatment. Okay, maybe you don't need a medically verified diagnosis. Just live your life and whatever, but recognize that you only have a self-diagnosis, and don't try and be too pushy, I guess, about communicating to people that I definitely have this disorder. You have to 100% believe me. The world's not like that. Brains aren't like that. The science on this stuff, like, you can't just do a blood test and be told what your disorders are. Brain scans still don't really show things very well. I know they've tried to do brain scans on DID. I don't have the expertise to really look into how valid they are. I believe they were quite small samples. So how much can you really read into it? They've done brain scans for things like gender dysphoria as well, like the whole idea that you have a male brain in a female body. But the overlap between male and female brains, there's quite a lot of overlap. So how can you definitively say that that is going to show whether someone is one way or the other? How can you distinguish between someone who actually needs to transition and someone who is just gay or whatever? I've got to say, speaking about, all that stuff, asexuality, I've kind of come to realize that that's probably part of my schizoid personality disorder, part of the trauma stuff. So had I not gone through all that, would I still be asexual? I don't know. But the thing is, I don't seem likely to change, so I might as well keep that label. I'm getting way off topic. Just some discussions about self-diagnosis. Self-diagnosis, I guess it also goes along with how you see yourself. Maybe that's why I'm getting onto those tangents. How do you see yourself? Do you have a good view of yourself, or are you kidding yourself? Are you trying to make yourself believe something because it makes you feel better? How honest can you be with yourself? So there's a lot of issues with self-diagnosis and just self-assessment in general. Outside mental illness, gender, autism, ADHD, neurodevelopmental, whatever, outside of all that, you have people, kidding themselves about what they're capable of. There's some people who really want to get into some particular university course, but they just can't do enough to qualify. They can't get a high enough mark or whatever, and that's just how it is. They might have someone who really wants to be an amazing basketball player, but they're not tall enough, so it doesn't matter how much they train, they can't beat certain people who are taller and have skills. It's not enough to just have one thing or another. I don't know. I'm sure you've been out there and seen people who think they're really good at something or think they're going to be able to do something, and it's just that's not how the world works. And this is one of the lies of childhood. If you just put your mind to it, you can do anything. Fuck off. There are plenty of things that I will never be able to do. There's that telling kids that they can do anything if they just try hard enough. I mean, for one thing, it's gaslighting, but also you're setting them up for disappointment. That's one of my problems, is I was told that the Disney happily ever after kind of thing, and then you get out into the world and realize that it's a pile of shit. No one knows what they're doing. Everything is fucked. And, that's the same thing with me in religion. I was told, oh, there's a God, and he loves you, and he'll look after you if you just, pray to him, do all the worshipy stuff, be a good person, whatever. And then it turns out the world is still fucked, and you can do everything right, and things will still be fucked, and there is no God, there's no evidence for a God, blah, 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 blah. And so I end up a lot of people who become atheists, they find it freeing because they don't have Big Brother in the sky chasing them. But I found it depressing because what the fuck is the point of all this then? I was led to believe that I had some holy purpose, and then it turns out, no, it's just whatever. There is no rules. There's consequences for actions, but, there is no overseeing whatever with a plan. Everything is just happening and people are doing their best. And your average person, there are wars and stuff. None of us agreed to get involved in any wars, but then it'll say, oh, our country went to war with so-and-so, and it's I didn't. And the people in the other country who went to war, they didn't agree to this. It's all these fucking leaders, and it's none of that's in our control. I'm way off topic. Anyway, so the world, the way people think about the world lacks nuance. And and depth, and there's a lot of things that we take for granted in terms of how we think about the world that are like, why do we think that when the evidence doesn't say that? Like, you know, so self-diagnosis, I cannot give you a definitive answer. I think it depends. A lot of stuff is like that. It depends. Now, there are objective things. There are objective things in life that you can't, and you know, things that you can't control. But also, like, you know, if you've got this many coins in one hand and this many coins in the other hand and you put them together, there is only one answer for how many coins you're going to have now. But for this mental health stuff, psychology stuff in general, the way you see yourself, what disorders you might have, that is a lot trickier, and there's nuance. And I can't tell you whether or not you should self-diagnose. It's about your situation, your abilities to self-assess, be honest, the professionals you have access to and the quality of them, the research out there. Like, you know, the ICD, they lumped everything under personality disorder because they started questioning the categories traditionally recognized in the DSM, and I can see where there is some room for nuance, but I think in terms of like in terms of recognizing the differences between people, the ICD version might be better, but in terms of giving someone the ability to communicate their experience properly, I think the DSM is better, because I can say, hey, I've got schizoid personality disorder, and then people can look at it and be like, oh, okay, so these things are not going to work. But if I just say I have personality disorder, that doesn't tell people anything. And I think part of the ICD is because they're squeamish. You know, if you say someone has a personality disorder, I think your average person assumes that you're criticizing their personality, you're criticizing who they are intrinsically. So maybe they shouldn't have used the word personality before the word disorder. But me, I don't know, maybe it's because I am schizoid. I'm not offended by the idea that I have a personality disorder. Like, I recognize that I have issues in the way I think and behave that I don't feel that they are issues. I feel that the way that I see the world and act is quite sensible, because I think the world is shit. Like, why does anyone not think it's shit? Why does anyone not just withdraw from the world? I don't get it. But I don't feel it. But intellectually I can see, okay, they function better in the world that we happen to live in. The world we live in is not going to change just because I have some quirks and want it to be a different way. So I do not function in the world that we live in. It's probably because of my personality. It's a disorder because I'm in distress. I cannot function in this life. And you have to be honest with yourself there. If you can't function in this world because of quirks of your personality, if you are causing distress to yourself or others or whatever, what's wrong with saying you have a personality disorder? This is the whole stigma of mental illness. And, you know, some people's attempt to remove that stigma, like gender identity disorder, to remove the stigma, they decided to call it dysphoria. But so they're essentially saying anyone else who has something labeled a disorder, somehow that's a bad thing, like, you know, we should think, you know, they're kind of reinforcing the stigma for the rest of us. Same with the autism community. They want it to not be a disorder, autism spectrum disorder. It's insulting to those of us who do have a disorder. Like, should we just rename everything? That's not going to change the nature of what it is. If you want to remove stigma, why not stop being so sensitive about the word disorder? And, you know, if you want to remove the stigma from personality disorders in particular, stop acting like that. Like, stop being offended. Stop thinking, I don't know, it's just frustrating. Like, I do think one of the reasons society doesn't want to recognize personality disorders is because they're squeamish. They're overly sensitive, you know, scared of offending and whatever. But it's really helpful for some of us to know what our problem actually is, because it's clearly not just depression or anxiety. What is actually going on with us so that we can get proper treatment. Yeah, I'm not really sure exactly where I was going with that. But, like, you know, society squeamishness can get in the way of a proper diagnosis. So sometimes you do have to just think for yourself. Now, some of the categories, yes, I get it. You can't shove someone into a box. But that's why personality disorders, like, to qualify for schizoid, you only need 4 out of the 7 I think DSM criteria, or 4 out of the 9 ICD, so like it's even easier to get diagnosed under ICD. You only need 4 out of the 7, so that leaves enough room for some variation without making the category completely meaningless, which I think the autism spectrum has gotten so mild in what they will recognize that it's starting to lose its meaning, because we're all kind of on the spectrum in some way, it's kind of implies. And, you know, with some of the gender stuff, I feel like that as well, because, you know, if I'm not completely feminine, does that mean I have to label myself some other gender? I'm like, no, that's not, you guys are overthinking it. Also, is that not insulting? Like, I don't know, I just grew up in the time where you could be female but act however you want, dress however you want. Now, some of these kids are sort of going backwards, and they're saying, oh, if you are not perfectly feminine, you're not a woman. That's actually kind of sexist. Like telling people that they can't be something. I don't know. It depends, because there's different groups amongst those weird gender ideologies, but just some of it is very backwards. Anyway, mental health stuff. I've gone way off topic, and this is almost an hour. It's just, yeah, it's complicated, and I don't know, are there any other issues that I haven't really addressed there? Oh, I was talking about lumping people into a box. Yeah, look, the box has to be big enough to have some room for differences and variations, but it has to be narrow enough that the category doesn't lose all meaning. So, you know, and the other thing is, with personality disorders, you can have schizoid and another disorder, including another personality disorder, and it's actually not that unusual. That might be another reason ICD decided to make it into a big, more like amorphous category, to take into account those people who are like between different personality disorders or have an overlap. But for the, you know, it's still easier to use the DSM labels, because it's just one word tells you basically what you need to know. Now, I think some of the people who are like, oh, you can't be schizoid, you talk too well to the camera, blah, blah, you're getting yourself out there, schizoids don't do that. There's a bit of that kind of thing, and that is like the people who have no nuance, they think you have to exactly fit those boxes, and that's bullshit. But then, you know, there will be some people who call themselves a disorder without fitting the box at all. So, you know, those extremes, ignore the extremes. Think about the middle. Like, where is the sensible middle? And I think most people in real life are sensible, and it's more like these online personalities and media people who act as if things are that crazy. But when you actually talk to a normal person in real life offline, you find out actually there's not as many crazies out there. You know, we're not being invaded by an LGBT army, and, you know, when religious people aren't all completely crazy nutcases who just want to sterilize everyone who doesn't fit their view, or I don't know. Just, there's not enough nuance in society, basically. And, you know, looking at psychology categories, you know, because it's not an exact science, you have to make some room for moving around without losing complete meaning. And when you self-diagnose, it's very dependent on your situation, and I hope that is enough to answer Scott's question, as well as questions no one asked me. I do have other schizoid videos out there if you are interested. Go and have a look at them. I type in either schizoid or SPD into my channel search, you will find them. Someone has decided it is time to end the video. I've also got videos about dissociation, depression, other things. And then ants. My most popular content about ants. And I am working on some more. I better go before I hurt myself. I don't know, I feel like if anyone watches this enough, I think the people who are most likely to have a problem with this video won't have the concentration to get through enough to get up to the bits that they'll have a hissy fit about. But I hope I offended both sides of extreme opinion, because you're all nuts. We need a sensible middle. And I know it's not exciting or popular, but the middle is where it's at. And it's just, I better go. This is going to take forever to upload.